Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday morning, August 13th, 2024. Great to have you here. I see folks are still drifting in, and I'm sure that'll continue to happen. Eli Sagor here. I'm a University of Minnesota Extension Specialist here to host this morning's webinar along with Lane Mosier. Lane and I work together with the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative based at the Cloquet Forestry Center with the University of Minnesota. And we're glad to be here. What we typically do is we leave about a minute of buffer time as folks continue to join. So we'll start up here in, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute. I'm just going to ramble a little bit here at the beginning. We were joking before I opened the space that I still have the habit of, I don't know, from maybe 6 years ago of telling people, okay, if you're new to video conferences, you can adjust your speakers now, or let us know if you're having tech issues. And of course, that's still true. Do feel free to use the chat if you are experiencing some sort of tech issue, but I think we've all been to enough webinars by now that it's probably not necessary to do too much tech checking. In any case, glad you're here. Katie and Anna, you look like you're ready to go. We've got the slides up. So I think, Lane, if you're willing to hit the record button, we'll get going.
Yep, it's automatically started, so we can just get the show on the road.
Perfect. All right, thank you. All right, again, welcome everybody. I see folks still drifting in. Really glad to have you here. Today is August 13th, 2024. My name is Eli Sagor. I'm an extension specialist with the University of Minnesota. Really happy to be here today. We have two speakers this morning for the Sustainable Forest Education Co-op webinar. What I'm going to do is briefly introduce our topic and speakers today. I want to mention a couple of events that are coming up. We've had some fairly important announcements through SFEC that I want to briefly mention. And then without too much preamble, I hope we'll get right into the content. And I guess I'm going to swap the order. The announcements I wanted to share, if you're watching this live, just in the last day or two, we have released information and opened registration for our Ecosystem Silviculture course. That's one of the most important offerings that the Sustainable Forest Education Co-op puts out. It's a 9-session certificate course. So you get a certificate in Ecosystem Silviculture from the University of Minnesota. If you go to our website, or you can email me. I'll put my email address in the chat in a little bit. If you have not received information about that and you're interested, it is open for now only to folks who have already expressed interest, because we've been talking about this for a bit, and it may fill from that group, but we will open it to the general community in, I think it's a week from today. So you can also just watch our website for new event listings. With that, I'm going to hand the screen to Anna Stockstad and Katie Frerker. Anna is an extension forester. She and I work closely together with the University of Minnesota. And Katie is with NIACS, the Northern Institute for Applied Climate Science. She is based in Duluth and works across the region on climate adaptation and forests. And they're going to be talking about a new group called the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group. I won't say too much about it, but it's a new and growing and inclusive group, and we encourage any of you who are interested in the content today to join us. With that, I'll hand the screen to Anna, and you can get going.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Eli. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm really excited to be co-presenting with Katie, talking about the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group. And I also want to quickly preface that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today was done collaboratively through the leadership team and through all the people involved with the Forest Climate Working Group. I recently came into a leadership role with this group, and so I'm really speaking on the great work that everyone has done before I came into this group. So I want to thank all of them for their great involvement, and I'll highlight them here in a few slides. So I just want to thank them for all their great work before I even get started with this presentation. Oops. There we go. Perfect. So I want to also preface before I get into the nitty-gritty of this presentation by saying that we are all on native land, and as land stewards, we need to be committed to tribal concerns, especially when we're talking about climate action and climate adaptation. The Forest Climate Working Group is committed to listening to and supporting the Native nations that share geography with Minnesota. And so all these climate adaptation efforts must be putting tribal concerns at the forefront of these discussions. So just going into the team, the Forest Climate Working Group leadership team. So I quickly want to thank Stephen Handler with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, as well as Eli Sagor, and then Katie Frerker, who's co-presenting with me today, as well as Nate Meyer with the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. And I also want to give a really big thank you to Jamie Mosel. She's going to be leaving her role with Extension, but she was a huge proponent of making the Forest Climate Working Group possible, getting it off the ground and setting this great foundation for where we are today. So I want to give a really big thank you to her. So for the plan today, I'm going to give an update on where the Forest Climate Working Group is today. Where have we been in the past? What are the steps that we've taken to get to this webinar today? And then where are we going in the future? And in the short term, we're actually looking at doing a fall gathering at the Cloquet Forestry Center this upcoming September, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. So that's going to be an upcoming event, as well as this very big topic and idea of the development of all lands, Minnesota-specific assisted migration guidance for tree species, which Katie will be going more into, and we'll be doing a guided discussion at the end of this presentation to collect your feedback on that. So to go now into the background of what the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group is, the primary target audience is really a cross-section of the forestry community focused in on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So this includes forestry and natural resource professionals from the public, private, and tribal sectors, as well as other land managers and stewards, and that includes the academic community, as well as the interested public. And so the goal of reaching this primary target audience is that it's going to represent, again, that cross-section of the forestry community to serve as the sustained hub of climate-related activity across time. So bringing together these professionals and stewards of the land who care about managing forests in the context of climate change and implementing climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. So we've defined this audience and the goal for reaching this audience. And so from here, we have drafted this vision statement. And I won't read this entire thing for you. You can read it here off of the screen. But as you can see, there are these big 3 goals of communication, coordination, and collaboration across the forestry community about those climate change impacts, adaptation, and mitigation. So bringing together and synthesizing this information to create this coordinated climate platform for the Minnesota forestry sector so that we can make sure these resources and tools are available to all these different parts of the forestry community so that we can translate those resources and tools into tangible climate action on the ground by these stewards of Minnesota's forests. So now thinking about how we got here, and again, like I alluded to at the beginning of this presentation, a lot of this was done by the rest of the team and not necessarily me, so I don't want to be taking credit for all of their great work, but I will be summarizing the work that we've done to get to this point. So starting in last year in 2023, we started off by gathering interest. What is the need for a group such as the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group? And this looked like sending a lot of emails and just putting our feelers out there to see where the needs and the concerns are. This led to listening and informational online Zoom sessions in May of 2023, and I'll be talking about the results of those in the next slide. And then in October of 2023, at the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference in Duluth, there was a symposium focused on the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group. And then that summarized feedback was shared with the group at an in-person gathering at the Cloquet Forestry Center in January of 2024. And this event had really good turnout, and it was a really wide selection of folks from across the forestry community, exactly like what was laid out in our target audience. And it was a great day of learning from each other, hearing a lot of sharing what work we have all been doing related to climate mitigation and adaptation in our own lands that we steward. And so sharing those efforts, what's worked, what hasn't, just sharing those stories with each other and learning from each other. And so from January 2024, there was then a more focused discussion on assisted migration at the Minnesota Society of American Foresters gathering in Grand Rapids in March of 2024. And like I said, this was a little bit more focused on assisted migration as a topic, because as I'll talk about in a couple of slides, assisted migration quickly rose to the top in terms of a priority informational need or even a concern in some ways that we need more information on, that we can learn from each other about and develop resources related to assisted migration. So from those listening sessions, like I said, 3 key themes emerged, and we put these into our vision statement as a result. And those 3 themes are communication, connection and collaboration, and then science and management updates. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these in the next few slides. So in terms of communication, this is what I just alluded to about learning from each other, talking about what we're seeing on the ground, what's worked and what hasn't worked in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation practices, and summarizing this knowledge and sharing it with each other so that we can all learn from each other when we're thinking about implementing this climate action in the lands that we steward. And a big part of this too is maintaining the centralized list of resources for this cross-section of the forestry community, because there's a lot of science and there's a lot of different resources out there related to climate change when it comes to managing our forests in the face of climate change. And so having the centralized list of resources is really crucial for getting the information out there. And then connection and collaboration is the next theme. So a big focus of these in-person gatherings is relationship building. So building connections and collaboration, and especially engaging tribal nations. This is going to continue to be a major theme and the first step of actions from the Forest Climate Working Group, especially when we're talking about developing assisted migration guidance, again, which Katie will talk more about. And then figuring out what are our shared priorities and learning needs. And from there, leveraging our shared capacity and trying to avoid recreating the wheel. And then science and management updates is that third theme that came from those listening sessions. And so this, again, involves sharing all this new research, tools, data, management techniques, and results. And then also coordinating on grants. This is something that can be really useful, especially with a lot of the grants that have been coming out recently. And then making content applicable at the organizational or planning levels as well. And so you've heard me saying both mitigation and adaptation throughout this presentation. And so part of these science and management updates includes touching on both of those themes. There are 2 sides of the same coin, thinking about both mitigation and adaptation concerns when it comes to managing forests under a changing climate. So we have those key themes from the listening sessions, and from those listening sessions, as well as from our in-person gatherings, 4 potential areas of focus have kind of emerged to the top. And at the last in-person gathering in January of 2024 at the Cloquet Forestry Center, we had small breakout group discussions related to each of these areas of focus. And so the first one is relationships and learning through quarterly meetings. So it's our goal to hold these quarterly meetings, ideally in person, and hopefully also with a Zoom option just to make it as accessible as possible. But we really try to focus on holding these in-person gatherings just to increase engagement and the ability to learn from each other. Another one is ramping up to update the Forest Climate Vulnerability Assessment, which could look like a working group as part of the larger working group, so a subgroup. So a subgroup working on the Forest Climate Vulnerability Assessment updates. The third one, as I've already alluded to, is assisted migration support. This is still a relatively new concept in terms of on-the-ground implementation in the forestry community. There's a lot of new research and a lot of information out there related to assisted migration. And so providing that support by synthesizing resources and developing recommendations as well is a need that came out of these gatherings at this point. And then finally, outreach and engagement with the broader forestry community. So again, this target audience really is a cross-section of the forestry community. So the group aims to reach out to really those connector organizations that connect the many different parts of the forestry community. So that's the MFRC landscape committees, the Minnesota Forest Resources Partnership, et cetera, to try to get these resources and information out there to the broader forestry community as a whole. So this assisted migration support area focus is one that's really risen to the top. We had a lot of discussion related to this, as I said, at the Minnesota SAF gathering, as well as the January gathering of the Minnesota Forest Climate Working Group at the CFC. There's a lot of excitement as well as concern, and really just the need for more information and resources related to assisted migration. So as a result of this, we've decided to focus our next gathering, which is going to take place on September 23rd at the Cloquet Forestry Center. We're going to be focusing this gathering on assisted migration. And so this is going to be an in-person gathering, but we will also have a Zoom option if you need to attend online, but we encourage you to try to attend in person if you are able. You can RSVP using this Z link or this QR code here. If you have any questions about the gathering, you can contact me directly, but I would love to see you there and to connect with you all because there is a lot of discussion to be had about assisted migration, especially with the concept of developing assisted migration guidance, which Katie is going to be talking about in the next few slides. So I encourage you all to attend if you're able. And again, please just let me know if you have any questions about that gathering. And now I'm going to pass it over to Katie, who's going to be talking more about assisted migration. Why should we be focusing on it? And why are we thinking about developing this all lands assisted migration guidance? So Katie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Anna, and thank you everyone for attending today's discussion. So like Anna mentioned, this assisted migration is just one of the focus areas that this working group would like to look at. And it's not the only topic that we'd like to discuss, but it has been rising to the top in terms of importance from what we've heard in the listening sessions. And one of the reasons, I just want to go into some of the background of why it's rising to the top and why we want to focus on it in the September in-person gathering if you're able to make it. So the first reason is that assisted migration is a really complex climate adaptation strategy, and there's a lot of nuance in it. And you see the figure on the slide here. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. We will in September at the in-person gathering, but when you say the words assisted migration, oftentimes alarm bells will go off for people because they assume you're talking about, you know, maybe bringing in Manchurian ash from Asia to replace our native ash species, or bringing something from a really, you know, far distance away. That's automatically what a lot of people assume we're talking about. But assisted migration as a tactic has a lot more nuance to it. And this diagram is showing that there are actually 3 types, and some of them are riskier than others. Like you can plant the same species, but get seed from further south, assuming it's more climate adapted. You can take species that are very close to their range limits and just nudge them northward, you know, assuming that that could have happened naturally over time. Or you can do that more extreme tactic of taking a species from very far away. So just understanding the nuance between even the types of assisted migration is very important, and promoting different strategies around those different levels of risk is something that we need to have conversations about in the state. Another reason that we've heard it's really important to have some overall guidance is because this actually is a higher risk strategy compared to other adaptation strategies, particularly if you're deciding to grab something, you know, that doesn't currently grow in the ecosystem. And it's interesting because even though it is a little more complicated and a higher risk, sometimes people are more drawn to this strategy because it's clearly you're doing something different. You know, you are doing something to respond to climate change. And so it's something that's very clear in people's minds that they're taking some kind of definite action, even though it has those higher risks and complexities. And so, you know, this is really great that we have interest in this topic in the working group so that we can provide information about how to mitigate those risks that are involved with it. And then also, like Anna mentioned, there's just a lot of new information, new guidance coming out, but a lot of agencies have not yet adopted this as a strategy, at least at an operational scale. There are a lot of studies that are out on the ground, but because it's so new for so many organizations, many organizations are lacking any type of guidance on this type of tactic. So next slide, Anna. So I currently work for the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. I work for the U.S. Forest Service. Prior to taking this position, I worked on the Superior National Forest as their ecologist and climate change coordinator. And one of the big projects I was helping coordinate on the forest right before I took this position was leading the development of an assisted migration plan for the Superior National Forest. And this plan was the first assisted migration plan for any national forest in the country. So it's now being treated as a pilot effort within the Forest Service as an agency. And so I think that Minnesota is really at a good space in terms of having resources available to it that we can build off of this plan. So the plan took maybe, maybe a lot of people who are attending this webinar were involved in the development of the plan. It took over 20 organizations and over 100 individuals to develop the plan. But really, there are a lot of lessons learned and a lot of resources in that plan that set the precedence for some kind of all lands guidance. But also, one of the things that we learned on the Superior was that tribal engagement was really the first step in the process in terms of setting the tone and defining the overall approach that the forest would take. And so this is something that's one of the big lessons learned that this working group has taken to understand that tribal engagement is critical and it needs to happen early and throughout the process of developing the guidance. And there's a link to the published plan on this slide. Next slide, Anna. So this slide is just showing the different chapters or sections of the Superior National Forest Assisted Migration Plan. And again, this is being used as a template nationally for other national forests to use. But like I said, this is really something that we in Minnesota can take on to use as a guide for how to develop all lands guidance within the state as well. You'll see that some of the topics, there's this internal program logistics chapter that really gets, that's really Forest Service specific, but a lot of the information applies more broadly to the entire state or to any other land management agency or group in the state. And I'll show you just a couple examples of how that might be more broadly applicable. Anna, if you want to advance the slide. So one chapter that was really critical in the development of this plan was the genetics information. We had a team of geneticists compile species profiles for 16 different tree species that were planted or were of interest to plant on the Superior National Forest. And so this is an example of some of the information that we have in the plan related to jack pine, but there are a lot of major tree species in northern Minnesota have these same profiles written. And what you'll see is that there's information about insect and disease concerns you might need to consider when looking for seed transfer. There's range potential, like its potential to expand its range, but also one of the main things we got out of this is there's also information on the maximum transfer distance. So if you're considering one of those lower risk assisted migration options, planting the same species, but getting it from the seed from further south so that it's better adapted to the climate, this species profile would tell you to go between 70 and 140 miles south to collect that seed for jack pine. So this is a really, really great starting point. We have, a lot of species already covered with this type of information that we can use to apply more broadly across the state. And next slide, Anna. Another example of some of the information in that plan that this working group could tackle statewide is, just understanding it's important to think about where you might get seed or where you might get your planting stock if you're going to do assisted migration, because the old way of doing business is collecting seed, near your planting site and planting it there. But if everyone is going to have to start moving to a different land base to collect their seed, it's obviously going to, require partnerships between different ownerships and organizations. And so this list I'm showing you on the screen is the list of partners that the Superior developed. But again, another big strength of doing this at the state level is we can work with different organizations and we can talk about what species are we growing, where are we growing them, and we can help solidify or create that network of supplying seed to one another when we are looking for assisted migration seed stock. So this is something where I think the working group really has the opportunity to create a network for figuring out the supply chain for getting assisted migration seed. Next slide, Anna. So from the listening sessions and, from the lessons learned on the Superior as well, we've been hearing that there's need for guidance on the following. So I mentioned that there's need for guidance for engaging with tribal nations as the first step in assisted migration planning. And the reason this has to be a first step is we need to recognize that when we're talking about potentially introducing new species or trying to maintain species on the landscape, just by transferring that seed, we have to recognize that the species assemblages on the landscape they hold cultural significance, the current species assemblages. And so we need to understand from tribal nations the risks and the comfort level with doing any of the different types of assisted migration. And we have to respect and honor that we need to focus on avoiding or minimizing cultural loss or affecting the tribal treaty rights that are in the area. So this really has to be one of the first steps, is just understanding where the different tribal nations are at and getting guidance on how to do assisted migration respectfully. So this is something that the working group would like to focus on. Another area of focus would be decision support for the high level plan development of implementation guidance that we can apply across agencies and organizations. So I mentioned the Superiors plan can be used kind of to develop those main points we want to consider, or some kind of general outline for how we might approach this as a state. But it needs to be high level, because there are going to be things specific to each organization that are going to differ between different groups. And so we need to keep it high enough that we can just apply it across different organizations within the state. And then another thing we want to do is make sure that we're being really clear about what are the risks associated with the different types of assisted migration, how aggressive you might be, and how can we offer different strategies to mitigate those risks as different agencies decide how they want to implement the guidance that we develop. And then one more slide for me. The goal of the guidance that we want to create as this working group is we want to directly engage and collaborate with the tribal nations before beginning and then throughout the process. And I keep emphasizing this because we really learned on the Superior that this was a really important first step in determining how to do assisted migration respectfully. So this is something that the working group leaders have already done, is trying to begin that engagement with tribal nations, to have them involved from the beginning before the working group gets too far down the road, and invite them to be a part of the process the entire time. We want to gather input from you all to see, what do you need? We think we've heard what people need, but there may be other things that haven't been vocalized yet, or what kind of concerns do you have in general? We want to hear that, so we make sure we're providing the right kind of guidance, or developing the right kind of product. And then we want to use the network to collaboratively develop this guidance for Minnesota tree species. Again, making sure that's informed by the tribal nations and other stakeholders' input.
All right. Thank you, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, we want to gather input from all of you. So now in the last part of this presentation, we're going to open it up for discussion. And we're going to start first with a poll. So if you could please launch that poll, that would be awesome. And so the question for you is just to rank, how valuable would you find Minnesota-specific all lands guidance on assisted migration for tree species? And I'll give it a minute or two to let those results roll in. Wow, thank you everyone for answering. Give it a few more seconds. So far, it's looking like it would definitely be valuable. All right, the numbers are starting to slow down, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and show you all the results. Okay, so you should all be seeing, I think, the results now. So it looks like the vast majority, so 54% thinks that assisted migration guidance for Minnesota would be extremely valuable. So this is great. This is aligns with what we've been hearing, as Katie mentioned. So thank you everyone for answering. This is really good information for us all to have. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results. In the next part of this discussion, I would encourage you to please raise your hand and unmute yourself, or you can also put responses in the chat to these next couple of discussion questions. So first, this is asking specifically about the format of what this assisted migration guidance could look like. So in what format would all lands assisted migration guidance be the most relevant and applicable to you and to your organization? So again, please feel free to put in the chat, or you can also raise your hand. And I think, Lane, I don't know if they're able to unmute themselves or if you have to do that as the host.
So I've allowed Matt to unmute, and so he should be able to give his comment now. Thanks, folks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hey, thank you very much. This is Matt Piccolo, Itasca SWCD. So what would be relevant is one that would be ECS specific. Not all assisted migration is going to be, it's not going to be a blanket, so it needs to be targeted. So there needs to be specific guidelines for various ECS subregions or subsections, or detailed to various ecotones. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Matt.
Oh,
Go ahead,
could
Katie.
I just wanted to follow up with that, Matt, that I agree. And again, it's not up to me, it's up to the whole working group, but I will say that the Superior National Forest, they used ecological sections, and in one case along the North Shore subsections because the section was too big. But that was how they developed the guidance even on the forest. So it wasn't forest wide. It was forest wide guidance, but it was particular to the ecological sections that overlap the forest. And so I agree that it would make sense to use likely sections rather than subsections. But using that hierarchy makes good sense. So hopefully that's a path that people want to pursue, others want to pursue as well.
Yeah, and I see another comment in the chat asking for summaries by ecological section or subsection. All right, and then I see Jamie Thibodeau has her hand raised.
Oh, Jamie, could you raise your hand again so I can unmute you? If you're still interested, or maybe she.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I just to that point of the ecological section, if there's anybody on the regional landscape committees here, I just, it's a great avenue to have these to get the stakeholders that you're looking for to come together on concerns. And whatever way you'd like to collaborate, I'm here for you. So thanks for doing this, and let us know how MFRC can support this endeavor.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. I had Anna, there was a question in the chat. Oh, and Lane I'll just verbally answer it. The question was, how are you going to prevent nurseries from selling some suboptimal seed stock? I'm assuming that's what the question was about. And that, there isn't a way for us to control what the nurseries put out there. I think one of the benefits of creating this working group or just creating general guidance within the state is that hopefully nurseries would be interested in being involved. We have a lot of resources out there for private nurseries that are available. But also the great thing to understand too is the more people, if we are able to get some statewide guidance and everyone is kind of informed on the best practices, then you can be requesting it from your nurseries and you can be passing it on to the nurseries, or just understand whether or not the stock that they're selling is a good idea. So it's about reaching the right people in terms of trying to include nurseries in the conversation about seed sourcing and tracking the seed source, but then also being informed as a consumer and giving that feedback to nurseries if you want stock from different areas and where they're selling.
And I imagine that we're going to try to increase engagement with those nurseries as the process goes on, because I'm not really aware if they've been involved in the group so far at this point. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, they're not in the target audience, but I can imagine we would want them to continue to be involved in a greater capacity going forward into the future.
Yeah, and Eli's pointing out in the chat, this is a building phase right now. part of the reason, it's not solely assisted migration focused, this working group. And so I imagine as the assisted migration work ramps up, other people will be put in touch or roped into being involved as the relevancy, rises. But because assisted migration is not the whole focus of the working group, it kind of is just like people are coming in as they are interested in it, but they need to be involved in the conversation about assisted migration as we get there or as it develops.
Definitely. All right, well, thank you everyone for your responses to that first question. I'm going to go ahead and show the next one. And this is about what challenges do you foresee with implementing assisted migration for tree species? This is a very big question, and we could probably spend 30 minutes talking about just this question alone. But if anyone has any responses, again, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. All right, go ahead, Matt. I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I would say that two things that I said, two things are capacity. Is there enough seedling? For example, if I want to get swamp white oak up here in Itasca County, where am I going to get it? And the other thing I see is that this is not an all or none process. This is a process that's going to be happening over time. And we tend to forget we're going to still get these very cold winters or very warm winters and vice versa. And so, there's going to be a lot of seed stock that may not work now because, well, frankly, you're going to be at different maxima and minima. So, we have to keep these things in mind, that it's not an all or none, but this is going to be a process and a process of selection. So what will happen is we don't want to get to the point where people think, oh, this is happening, this is going to work, this is going to work, and then you get a cold winter and things die. And so we don't want to dampen enthusiasm, because without that, knowledge of this is a process. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's another reason why we don't want to just be focusing solely on assisted migration and getting tunnel vision, instead looking at the big toolbox of climate adaptation strategies as a whole, because of that uncertainty. And then I see another concern in the chat about seed sourcing and tracking, and potential concerns from industry. Administrative ties associated with agency process, internal operational orders will be something to be mindful of. Thank you all for your input so far.
And Anna, if I could just quickly hop in, Amanda, would you mind elaborating a bit on some of those potential concerns from industry, or I guess anecdotally, or the like, what do those concerns consist of?
Okay, thanks, Lane. Can you hear me? Just
Yep.
trying to figure out how to unmute. Yeah, I think I work for DNR Forestry, for folks that don't know me, and we just occasionally encounter some pushback about climate adaptation in general from the industry. I think there's this concern that we're going to try to move away from traditional, high priority timber species, and I think a lot of it is just a need for ongoing communication and learning around the topic. But I could just see that, again, some of the, Katie referred to how red flags can get raised around assisted migration, and a lot of it's going to have to do with outreach and education. But I think we're just going to have to be prepared to have discussions about what that means for the desired future conditions of the forest that we're managing, and what we're hoping that cover types are going to be looking like over time, and be prepared to respond to some concerns from our partners, not just industry. I know there's concerns from tribal nations as well, and possibly others, just around like how that might shape the future landscape and what the impacts that might have on like available timber species in the future.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I see another concern in the chat about keeping the document, or whatever form this guidance takes, keeping it updated with the most current research. I definitely agree that will be a challenge, and trying to make it a living document, or whatever that looks like, keeping up with the research. Any other challenges that people foresee? Otherwise, we'll keep it moving. And yep, oh, I see Jamie commented, keeping the context relevant. Yep, the scale. Absolutely. And asking when is assisted migration appropriate? That's definitely a big question to ask right at the start for sure, because it not always is appropriate. Oh, I see Eric Skank raised his hand. Eric, we'll take your comment and then we'll keep moving on.
Hey, this is David Wilson, but Eric is on. Go ahead, Eric. I actually had a comment. I wanted to respond to Amanda Keeper just a little bit and some of the pushback in terms of transitioning to other timber species that aren't on the big list right now. I'd want to keep that discussion in the context of the less than fully implemented sustainable harvest level right now. And so what that means for the forest going forward is it already is transitioning to a different state, more older forest, bigger trees, a lot of shade tolerant things coming in on those unmanaged acres. So in terms of the concerns, I'd just be interested in the desired future condition and timber availability that's going to happen by default versus where those important stakeholders and partners in the timber industry would like to see it go. I just think that should be a part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I see one last comment in the chat, coordinating and managing a larger range of planting options and needs across the landscape with many individual decision makers. Yes, I definitely agree with that being a challenge. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your input. We're going to have more time for questions and discussion here in a couple of slides, but I'm just going to keep us moving. And you can feel free to send us many more thoughts and all of your input via the survey. So this asks some of the questions that we just asked in the discussion, as well as more questions related to the development of assisted migration guidance. So I would love to hear from all of you. The input that you provide here will directly inform our in-person gathering in September. So please feel free to use that link or the QR code to fill out that survey. And hopefully we can send that in the chat as well. Oh, yep. Thank you, Eli. And here's another Z link, unfortunately without a QR code. But if you want to sign up for our mailing list, you can go to this Z link here. And if you sign up for the mailing list, you'll be able to stay up to date with all of our communications and updates from the group. And with that, I just want to say thank you all for participating today. I want to thank you, Katie, for co-presenting with me today, as well as the entire group. And then I guess we can just go ahead and turn it over for any questions. So please feel free to send those questions in the chat, and then Katie and I can answer them. So thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to follow up on Amanda's and David's points also about industry concern and kind of shifting species on the landscape. And again, I think one thing to keep in mind is assisted migration does not have to be, we don't have to choose the most aggressive approach. As a group, we can talk about guidelines for taking species from far away and introducing them. But, just for everyone's awareness, the Superior National Forest, after that heavy tribal engagement, they anticipated taking a more aggressive approach, but the main approach they're taking is assisted population migration, which is just getting seed from planting the same species and getting the seed from further south. And they have a goal of converting their entire stock to just seed from further south by 2050. So that is the main focus of their plan. It's the main focus of the Forest Service as an agency. It's kind of a stance they've taken, is do this first. As climate continues to change, think about those other options. And so we don't, as a state, we don't have to be aggressive in our approach. If there are major concerns, we can talk about ways to do it, but it doesn't have to be the main approach that folks take. And so just making sure that everyone understands we don't have to jump to that, type of assisted migration that raises alarm bells. We have the flexibility to use a variety of approaches and be a little more conservative while still knowing that we're taking a really positive, climate adaptive action with our seed sourcing as maybe a first step. But I think, it's up to everyone in the working group to decide that, and particularly the tribal nations. But just so people are aware that even in these conversations, people tend to jump to that more aggressive approach where we don't have to go that route.
Thank you for that additional context, Katie. All right, any questions from the group or further comments?
Your question, just those and panels, but yes, our recording will, so this is being recorded and it will be put on our SFEC YouTube channel in our 2024 webinar series playlist. And so that recording, just look for that over the next couple of days as we edit it, process it, and then publish it.
Thanks, Lane.
All right, I'm not hearing too much more chatter in the chat and Q&A right now. So I'll say a couple of things. I'll invite folks to please continue to submit questions. We do have time and we're happy to address those. But I want to thank Anna and Katie for their presentation. And I've posted a few things in the chat that might be of interest. So if you're not staring at the chat throughout the presentation, I'll just draw your attention to the couple of the links that Anna and Katie mentioned about the Forest Climate Working Group contact list and the assisted migration survey. Those are both available in the chat. And we encourage you to sign up for both of those. Complete the survey. We'd love to hear from you. We do want a range of views and really encourage folks to contribute to that survey. And also the gathering on September 23rd is at the Cloquet Forestry Center, as we've said several times throughout the hour. Everybody's welcome. If you want to come, that's great. If you want to suggest to your nearby or favorite nursery manager that they come, that's great too. Everyone's welcome. We do ask folks obviously to RSVP. We will be providing lunch at that event and would love to know who's coming. Finally, I guess maybe not finally, but we have, for those of you who are interested in continuing education credits, I've just pasted that link in the chat one more time. And I am going to post just a little bit of information about a few other upcoming SFEC events, some of which I mentioned earlier. And here now in the chat is a long post listing a few of those with dates and some details. There's a lot coming up. Lane and I have been working hard to coordinate a variety of different events, and you'll see those all listed at the link at the bottom, the SFEC upcoming events link. It occurs to me that the Forest Climate Working Group meeting on September 23rd is not on our list of upcoming events, so I'll change that before my 11 o'clock meeting, and folks who would like to help get the word out about that. First, we encourage you to sign up for the Forest Climate Working Group link, contact list that's in the chat. Second, come join us. Spend a day, throw some ideas in, listen, learn, talk, engage. We'd love to have you. Katie, Anna, Lane, any closing thoughts before we break for the morning?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, thanks for participating today, folks, and for being engaged in the chat. And
yeah,
appreciate that.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Lane, for facilitating.
Awesome. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Again, reach out to any of us if you have questions or comments, but appreciate your joining, and we'll hope to see you at another event soon. Bye.
Thanks,
for now.
Eli.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Eli.
Bye.